Well, we'll go ahead and officially start. I want to welcome everybody who's in attendance and those who are still joining to our Zoom today. This is our first Zoom briefing of 2025. We started doing Zoom briefings during COVID, and while we didn't like COVID, we did like Zoom briefings. It's really great because we can bring you guests like our friend Grover Norquist without him having to fly to Dallas. So it's very convenient, and we plan to do a number of Zoom briefings this year, and hope you'll all join us as often as you can. My name is Tom Giovanetti. I'm the president of the Institute for Policy Innovation. If you want to know more about IPI, you can go to our website at ipi.org. Both Americans for Tax Reform and IPI got it on the web very early. We were able to snag those enviable three-digit URLs. We do appreciate you being here. We very much appreciate those of you who are financial supporters of IPI. Thank you very much. You make this possible. Our supporters make everything we do possible. We don't sell anything. We're utterly dependent on the contributions of our supporters. So now that all the housekeeping is out of the way, 2025 is shaping up to be a very exciting year for conservatives. We're in this situation where we tend to have these pendulum swings where after a presidential election, the party of the president tends to control things for 2 years, and then you have a midterm election that may or may not go your way. But it seems like every administration is given a 2-year window, and every Congress is given a 2-year window to actually move their priorities. And given the general dysfunction of Congress over the past couple of years, over the past couple of decades, I should say, you don't necessarily get as much done as you would like to. And so priorities makes a big difference. Strategy makes a big difference. And that's why we wanted to bring our friend Grover Norquist from Americans for Tax Reform for our first Zoom of the year to talk about what should be the priority of conservatives in DC. What should their strategies be? How can we get the most done and the most important things done during 2025 and 2020 and the first half of 2026? So essentially, you get 18 months basically. And when you've got a situation like we have right now, where the House is very, very close, it's not going to be simple. You can't just railroad things through. So Grover is one of the most respected strategists in Washington on the center right. Grover has everyone's ears on the center right. And so there's nobody better than Grover to talk to. When I was filling in for Mark Davis a week or so ago, I had Grover on. We had a great 12-minute segment on the radio, but we needed more time. So we thought we would do this today. So Grover, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for everything that Americans for Tax Reform does. And share your thoughts with us about how conservatives and how Republicans need to approach the early days of 2025, what the priorities ought to be, what the strategies ought to be, and then we'll try to take a few questions afterward.
The first decision the Trump administration and the Republicans in the House and Senate have to decide is, should the Trump administration, the second Trump term, last 4 years or only 2 years? If we do not elect a Republican majority in the House and in the Senate, okay, then the Trump presidency will be there for 2 years. He won't be able to do judges because they won't get past the Senate. He won't be able to pass laws because the House and the Senate will say no. And anything that's a budget that he would have to sign would be written, at least co-written, by the Democrats with a veto. And still in Washington, D.C., if there's no budget, it's the Republicans' fault. Doesn't matter. The Republicans used to pass budgets and Clinton would veto them, and then the Republicans shut down the government. Then when the Republicans would not pass a budget in the House or the Senate, it was their fault. It'll be the Republicans' fault if they don't pass the budget, which gives the Democrats an advantage if they're part of the decision making. I vote for a 4-year Trump term. I know the Trump people are preferring a 4 to a 2-year Trump term. There are about 7 members of the House of Representatives who could care less if Trump had a 2-year term or a 4-year term, and that's the danger. Right now, things look okay. but there are 7 or 8 Republicans in the House, several from Texas, who are deciding whether or not to kill the Trump presidency at the end of 2 years. Step one, the president has about 100 executive orders. He's telling people, and others are pointing out, there's going to be more executive orders on day one than ever before in the history of the world, maybe altogether added up than all the other presidents added up on day one. A lot of very important things, restoring the rules we had for how we dealt with the border, the southern border. All the damage that Biden and the Democrats did, they didn't change any laws. The House, the Senate would have vetoed that. They would have stopped any effort to change a law on immigration, but they did change the way the executive branch reacted to people crossing the border. So it's not exactly executive orders necessarily, but executive decisions. We're going to build the wall. We're going to fix it. And their doors, the door open. We're going to close them at night and have people watching. Little things. And by the way, if we catch you and you're a criminal, we're going to throw you back out. Those are already the law. You just have to decide to do it as an executive branch. So there's a lot of progress that can be done on border security without a single vote out of Congress. The money to fix up the wall is actually to be found in existing pockets in the Pentagon. My brother was the comptroller at the Pentagon for Trump's term and then deputy secretary, but he found the money for the wall, the initial walls, because the Democrats had passed a law before Trump was in saying, oh, we got to build a wall. They were lying. They were trying to get past the election. But they did pass the law that says we want to do it. They didn't put any money up for it, okay? They knew they were lying, so there wasn't any money for it, but they did pass the law that says we're doing it. Then when Trump came in, there was a law that says we're going to do this, and there was money in various pockets of the Pentagon where, we built 7 somethings instead of 12, and so there's some money waiting to decide what to do. Because that was a defense issue, because it said it was being built, the wall for defense security issues, it could be reappropriated, reassigned by the executive branch to start building the wall. So a lot can be done on border security day one. And that, I think, is the thing you're going to see the most news about. And that's very helpful with the people getting a sense. Trump said he was going to do it, and he really did it. And by the way, everything he's doing is undoing something Biden did. So let's remember who is responsible for the mess we have now. Taxes is a different matter. We can only cut taxes or cut spending with a 51 vote margin in the Senate and a simple majority in the House through a process called reconciliation. Under regular rules, regular decisions by the House and the Senate, the Democrats can filibuster and it requires 60 votes. We have 53 Republicans. Most of them are very good, solid conservative Republicans. There are 1 or 2 who on different issues, regional issues, can't vote with us on certain things. Okay, we could lose 3 votes, 50 votes plus the vice president, and you've got a majority. But when you need 60 votes to cut taxes, to reduce the budget, to pass a budget, then that can only be done through reconciliation. You can do 1 of those a year. There's an argument that maybe you can sneak in a second one, sort of, but it's basically once a year. And there was a debate at one point, should we have 2 bills where you'd put in the money for the border security in one bill and do the tax and spending stuff in another bill, on the theory that 2 bills would move faster than 1 bill? Well, for a number of reasons, this makes no sense, because anybody who was unhappy with what was in the first bill would tie it to the second bill, and the 2 of them were only going to move forward together anyway. And anything that you could do, spending more on defense or on the border, that can be done inside reconciliation with the reconciliation package for taxes and spending. There's no reason.
As long as it has to do with expenditures and taxes, it could be done under reconciliation, right?
Right. But this is where some people got confused. And this is maybe more than you need to know, but I know I'm talking to a sophisticated crowd here. Some people think, and I had somebody from a big foundation in town that's conservative tell me, well, we've already passed H.R. 2, which was the Republican House bill from a year ago that changed some of the laws on immigration. None of that can go through the a
Right.
bill that's in reconciliation.
Right.
And here are these guys who talk to people and talk to congressmen who are supposed to be experts in the field, saying, "Oh, we could pass this bill inside reconciliation."
Yeah, you can't like regulate social media moderation through reconciliation. I mean, it's got to have something to do with expenditures or either income or revenue of the federal government.
But it's more than something to do with. It has to be sort of only
Yeah, yeah,
spending and taxes. Give you a for instance. One of the reasons that we lost the House in the middle of Trump's first term, I think he remembers this, guys. He remembers he was president for 2 years, not 4 years. And as a result, we lost control of the House, lost 40 seats in the House because House members, many from Texas, thank you, said we were elected to abolish Obamacare. I promised to abolish Obamacare. I try and urge all candidates never to promise to pass a piece of legislation because they only have one vote. Okay. And
yeah,
if you go into Congress and you don't have the votes, even though you voted to abolish it, you are a liar because you said you were going to abolish it because you
yeah.
know what you're talking about because you can't pass anything by yourself. Okay. So when we do the taxpayer protection pledge, we say we want you to promise never to vote for a tax increase. We don't make you promise that a tax increase will never pass because if you're in the minority in the House and the other team runs the Senate, it's not your fault. All we're asking is never cast a vote for a tax increase. You don't vote for a tax increase. If you vote for a tax increase, you've lied to people. But you're not lying if you lose a vote because you didn't have enough votes. But these guys would run for office. I'm going to abolish the, and President Trump says this sometimes too. He's going to do what he means is, I'm going to fight very hard to get this done. What he says sometimes is, I'm going to do something that requires the House and Senate to pass the bill. And there he's really sticking his neck out because he can't do things. He needs the House and Senate to do it. So that said, because some of these House members said, I want to abolish Obamacare, I do too. But we didn't have the votes for that. Okay. So they didn't vote for the tax cut, which defunded Obamacare. Okay. And what Ted Cruz brilliantly did, thank you, Texas, for the new and older and wonderful Ted Cruz. The younger Ted Cruz was less excited, but this guy is a marvel. He is the smartest guy on the set. He's every time we have what we think is a good idea at Americans for Tax Reform, we want Ted Cruz to carry it because everyone on the Hill knows that Ted Cruz is a serious person. And when he introduces a piece of legislation, it's not for show. It's not to get on a talk show or something. And he works it through and he does much more than he gets credit for. But he came up with the idea, we can't change the law which mandates that certain people have to buy Obamacare. Stupid law, bad law. But you can't repeal a law under reconciliation. What he did was, what if we changed the fine from between 2 and 5,000 to 0? So there are millions of Americans wandering around breaking the law every day, not paying into Obamacare, not buying Obamacare. And
Yeah.
the penalty is nothing. Thank you, Ted Cruz. And that even scored wonderfully because they were using those fines to prove that they were going to, spend more money that would force people to spend more taxpayer dollars. And so when we eliminated it, all of a sudden spending was reduced and it made it easier for us to pass our tax cuts because we had the spending cut. What was the spending cut? Not fining people not to spend. So it was brilliant on both ends of it. And we need more creative thinking like Ted Cruz. Sorry, the ad for Ted Cruz is now officially over. But very impressive, very helpful. But while they spent months debating that which you couldn't do and saying, well, yes, you can. And guys, you can't. And eventually they gave up because they realized that didn't make any sense. We didn't pass the tax cut in 2017 until December 22nd of 2017. It didn't take effect until January 1st of 2018. So the tax cut, which was to drive the growth, which was to get us reelected in 2018, didn't take effect until January of 2018. And we just yesterday had a bunch of small businessmen testifying at the House Ways and Means Committee. And they said, guys, we don't know how to decide. These are the people who ran barbershops and lady barbershops and things like that. They said, we need to decide, I need to decide if we can hire another person, put in, expand what I'm doing, put in more machinery, put in more computers, what we can do here. I don't know until you pass a law that tells me whether the expensing rules are permanent or whether the lower rates for pass-through corporations, which are disappearing, okay, whether those lower rates are in or out. And I can't invest based on you telling me we're pretty sure this is going to happen. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, people need certainty. Businesses need certainty, right?
So we need the tax cut passed ASAP, which is in the next 4 months, and it needs to take effect January 1st of this year. And we need to be telling people every day, this is what the tax cut's going to look like. We're going to make the present tax cuts permanent, okay? And that starts from January 1st of this year, meaning whenever we pass it, January, February, March, April, May, even if we get delayed a month, nobody should get scared. This is going to start January 1st, the tax cut, okay? And it's going to be permanent. How do we make it permanent? Because we say we're not operating off of present law. Present law is taxes are here taxes are here, but they're going to jump up to here. That's present law, okay? And if you cut those taxes, you have to pay for them. We want to stay at present policy, which is here, not present law, which is in a year, all these taxes jump up. So we're going to say taxes are low now, lower than they were under Obama, and we're going to continue that out into the future. Now, there are a few tax cuts that have already disappeared. Expensing is not 100% now, and it keeps disappearing each year.
And that's something in particular that those of us who are sort of supply siders, we really care about. We think that's one of the most important ones.
Yes, and that will be made whole, and then but we're going to have to pay for that somehow with spending cuts, hopefully, into the future. But you don't have to pay for present policy. The House Ways and Means is for this. The Speaker is for this. I had dinner with Mr. Crapo last night, the Senate finance guy. He's in. Lindsey Graham, who's put himself in the center of everything, again, because that's what he does. He's for it in a very good way, and the president is cool. So we are in very good shape there. I think even Arrington has come around and is being helpful on that part as well. So this is looking good that we can get this passed. There will be confusion. The Freedom Caucus people put out a statement the other day saying they wanted to raise taxes on corporations by eliminating state and local tax deductibility for your corporate income tax or property taxes and things like that. So that could be as high as a $500 billion tax increase if you got rid of all of it over a decade. And take that money to subsidize labor unions in blue states. Does this sound, I don't know if this sounds like not something that the Freedom Caucus should be for. You might talk to them about it, but they came out for this yesterday. They said this is a brilliant idea. Raise taxes on productive Americans and subsidize government workers in New York City and New York State, state workers and city workers. That's literally the plan they came up with. Now, this is going nowhere. In a 5-minute conversation with any one of those guys, you should be able to explain to them, why do you want to raise taxes on businesses? How many jobs will that kill in your neighborhood? And why in the world are you subsidizing overpaid bureaucrats and their pensions in New York and in Illinois and in California? Why are you doing this? Okay, it's criminally insane, but that's what they just said. And so you can't react every time somebody has a dumb idea, and I'm sure they can try and explain it. Actually, I'm not sure about that, but that's what they said. This is the people who present themselves as if they're conservative Republicans, but it's the caucus that doesn't work well with other children. So that'll happen. It'll have to be calmed down. It's not the first time that's happened. Arrington suggested raising the corporate income tax the other day, speaking to the entire House caucus. That the leadership said, never, never, never. And that was a mistake, he said. Okay, we'll take it.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, Mr. Harrington, no, you may not raise the corporate income tax. That is not happening here. Now he's backed away from that position. But these things pop up. People say things they didn't mean, they didn't think through. Maybe they meant them and think through them, but they realize that this isn't happening. The president wants his tax cuts made permanent. That is a good starting point. Now, should we add to that? I vote yes, okay? The president wants to take the top rate, which is 21%. Remember, our corporate income tax, 21%. It's about a 4% average corporate. What's the corporate rate in Texas? Do we know? It's
I
average
don't know.
4%. Average about 4% in
we have a very weird business tax system in Texas.
That's right. You guys don't do the corporate tax. You do
it needs to be reworked, but yeah.
Okay. But the stuff that's called corporate income taxes is average about 4.3%. So we're on average in the United States 25% corporate income tax. China's at 25 for the less advantaged companies and 15 for the ones they really think are important. They're at 15 and 25. We're at 25. Okay. This is not where you want to be. Stupider than China is not where you want your tax policy. So the president originally, Trump, said, we keep saying president because everybody's already forgotten about
acting president, right?
Yeah. I don't know how Biden disappeared. Maybe the Democrats felt we don't need to mention that he's president anymore.
It's like Trump's been the acting president since he was elected. It's just really, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's 3 terms. So when we go to 15% from 21, that costs the government $460 billion. These numbers
hey, Grover, let's go back and review, by the way, the genius of Trump arguing for 15% corporate rate, because the free market, the center right had basically centered on, man, if we could get it down to 24%, that would be like heaven. That would be nirvana, right? And so Trump says, the heck with 24%, I want 15%, right? And so you end up with 21%. You end up with something that is better than anybody on the center right ever imagined was possible.
Yep. So that was a great negotiation thing, but it also would have been a good place to have been if we could have gotten there. Corker of Tennessee, if you want to send him a letter, he's the guy who screwed it up and made it impossible to get to 21 because he set up an imaginary amount of money that we were allowed to cut taxes at 1.5 trillion over 10 years. That's why we couldn't do everything we needed to do. He's a very rich guy, so he didn't evidently care about other people's taxes. But 21, we could have been at 15, but for Corker and the guy from Ohio. Said no, and we just couldn't get past that. So what we did do is we got to 21. We got to 20, and Marco Rubio took it up to 21 because he wanted to spend money on something. And the last minute, he jumped us, okay? And this could happen again. We could end up with somebody like Marco Rubio going, I'm not voting for you, and you need my vote unless you raise the corporate income tax here. I don't think we're going to give up on the corporate income tax. I think we're more likely to take it from 21 down to 15. How we would, the pay for that, and you do need a pay for it. By that, I mean a reduction in spending or a reduction or increase in taxes. I prefer reduction in spending, of course. Some people point out that if you got rid of corporate SALT and took the corporate rate from 21 to 15, those two are about equal. Okay, so that would all be inside the corporate rate, be tax reform, fewer deductions, lower rate, and made permanent. That might be worthwhile. The kind of spending cuts we're talking about, I just moments ago walked out of a room. We could take $100 billion that we can use to cut taxes with by selling off the spectrum that the government owns that it doesn't use. The Pentagon has a lot of extra spectrum. For 40 years, they've been going, oh, we might need it. Yeah, the last 40 years, you've been telling us you might need it. Come on. I mean, let's sell it off. And if you need it back in an emergency, we could buy it back for you if you really did need it. But they've been holding on to it and not using it. And we could have sold it and people could use it in the private sector because we need this spectrum. There's not as much spectrum as we'd like. You could block grant Medicaid. And that's somewhere between $600 billion and $1 trillion in less spending by block granting it to the states and simply saying it will now only grow with inflation or inflation plus population, not willy-nilly. That is a huge permanent savings out into never land. These are very, very serious numbers. You could sell a lot of federal land. You could allow leasing for oil and natural gas and other things on federal land. You could sell the land, what's under the water out for 200 miles. Some people have suggested there's $90 trillion of stuff under the ground, under government ground in the United States. I may be off by a few $1 trillion, but those are significant numbers. And so there's a lot of savings you can have by selling off the rights to or the land under which there's something worth digging for. Yeah. So there's some real possibilities here to do serious spending reduction and make that permanent. You could block grant food stamps to the states and then put a cap on it. Because Obama really put it way up, as did Biden. You could take it back down again and put a cap on it. So there's a lot of savings to be made. If we can get this done, and hopefully that one of the things that the Freedom Caucus guys could do is come up with a list of spending reduction. Okay, stop thinking of ways to raise taxes on other people, because we're not doing that for you. But come up with a list of spending restraint. That would be
if all we did is ratchet spending back down to pre-Biden levels, we would be in remarkably better shape, you know?
And the Senate guys tell me they're working on setting up a cap on spending that does just that. My head hurts a little bit when they're trying to explain to me how it's supposed to work. But they seem to think that it becomes a possibility working from the Senate side doing budgeting.
Yeah. Let's talk for a moment. Let's stay on taxes. Let's talk about the SALT cap, because this is something that Republicans in blue states are pressuring Trump to eliminate or increase. And, for those of us who have spent our careers doing tax reform, the SALT cap was a really significant strategic thing, because we had been watching for decades how essentially low tax red states were essentially subsidizing high tax blue states through the deductibility of state and local taxes. So the $10,000 SALT cap was a really big deal. That was a real long-term, that was a structural improvement as opposed to, like executive orders and things like that, right? So how much pressure is there going to be to change the SALT cap, and is that a big problem?
More today than 2 days ago, because the Freedom Caucus decided it was a good idea to do this, which no one expected. We expected pressure from a handful of Republicans in New York and California, and now
sounds like we need to rename the Freedom Caucus.
I don't know what it is, but they just stabbed the president in the back when they did that. And I have no idea why they thought that was a smart move, because it's not. But let's put that aside and assume they weren't being serious about life, and we'll come back to them when they grow up. But the Republicans in New York and the Republican congressmen in California, not too many of them, understandably have pressure on them, because those states were having their high-income citizens in high property tax cities and high income tax states, New York City, San Francisco, LA, Chicago, subsidized by the rest of the country, because the government of New York would say, we're going to raise our state taxes on you. But you know what? You don't really have to pay that much more, because the money we take from you, the federal government would have taken a third of it anyway. How about that? So there's really only a 2/3 tax increase, and you're getting a subsidy from the rest of the country. When we did tax reform in 1986 with Reagan, there was this is back when the Democrats would work with Republicans, took the rates down to 15% and 27%, pretty good, and eliminated a lot of deductions and credits. It was revenue neutral. It wasn't a big tax. It was a little $50 billion tax cut, but not big, mostly revenue neutral. There was one tax cut, tax credit, tax deduction that Bradley, the basketball player out of New Jersey, who was one of the key Democrats here, the only thing you can't touch is SALT.
Right.
Because he knew that the unions in New Jersey and New York needed the SALT deductibility. So when they negotiated higher and higher pay and bigger vacations and longer retirement, they could go, well, you're not paying for all of it. The guys in Iowa are paying for some of it. That is what we actually were able to touch and greatly reduce by about $100 billion a year, 100 billion a year, when we eliminated almost all of the SALT deduction for personal income taxes. What we left was $10,000 per person per tax return. Okay. Now, there is something that some of the Republicans on the red states came and talked to me about a year or two ago, and they said, you know what? Two people living in New York can deduct $10,000 from their federal income when they pay their taxes if they have $10,000 or more of property taxes, income taxes. But if they get married, they don't get to add their 10 and 10 to 20. It's back to 10. And that's a marriage penalty tax here. And I talked to the social conservative groups, Ralph Reed of Christian Coalition and some others, and said, do you see this? I see this as a marriage penalty issue. Do you? Would you support making that change? That's for married couples. If two people get married, the two of them can each have $10,000. So $20,000 for married couples, $10,000 if they're single and not yet married. And they said, yes, that is a marriage penalty tax. We would endorse that for that reason. I liked that, and we were there almost we had an agreement with New York, California, and the Republican leadership, but it came late, so it didn't end up inside the bill we had 2 years ago for debt ceiling. But it was there and agreed to. The president recently said he likes that idea. He thinks the fix should be take 10 per person and not 10 per filing, but 10 per person. So husband and wife can each get 10 inside one return that they jointly.
So married filing jointly would get 20.
Yes.
Head of household and single would get 10, essentially. Yeah, okay.
That's it. Now, they're now talking about much more because it's not a bad thing to start your negotiation from much more. And now we're really in trouble thanks to the Freedom Caucus, who just said, why not? We'll steal it from companies and businessmen and give it to you up in New York. So it's going to be much harder to put the genie back in this bottle thanks to our friends over at the Freedom Caucus.
I'll share with you, because in fact, one of the things I want to talk about in a few minutes is the state level, not the federal level, but I'll share with you this Texas detail because I know you care about the state level too. Texas is a very high property tax state. And so it's been very interesting how many hard right conservative Republicans in Texas were shocked by the 2017 tax reform because their taxes went up because of the SALT cap limitation. That was it, because they have very high property taxes. You can be upper middle class in this state and you can hit the $10,000 limit. And so while I think the original rationale for the SALT cap was those rotten high tax blue states, it has the beautiful impact of also creating tax pressures on red states too, which is a really big deal. I mean, we don't want the federal tax code subsidizing high taxes at the state level, regardless of whether it's a red or a blue state.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
That's been great. Okay, so I would say that there's three huge takeaways so far from our conversation. One is that presidents could actually get a 2-year term unless they do a really good job.
Yep.
And then they get a 2-year extension, which is a really interesting way of thinking about it. I think the second thing is that immigration, for the most part, has to be done through executive orders, and that taxes and budget stuff has to be done through legislation, which is hard. One of the concerns that I have is that there's going to be some pressure at the congressional level, maybe not from President Trump, but from the congressional level, to do a whole lot of sort of retribution and investigations and things like that into the Biden administration, et cetera, et cetera. And I just don't think we have time for that. And I don't think those are priorities. I think we really need to focus on moving forward and making as much structural improvement as we possibly can. Do you think that that's going to become a problem, the sort of retribution and investigation thing?
I think there's a way to have accountability without retribution, and that'll make it easier to get the information. When the South African government shifted from the Afrikaans running the country and not letting Black Africans vote to allowing everybody to vote, they set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So people came in and they got to the truth of what happened, who hit who, but they didn't then hang anybody, okay? Or throw people in prison for a jillion years or seize their property. They simply said, this is what happened. We're going to be one country now. We're not going to do retribution. Now, mind you, they haven't completely stuck with that, but that was a way people could testify knowing that when they said, I did these things on behalf of the government and they were bad, that they weren't going to jail for it. But they wanted to know the truth. I think we need something very much like that in Washington, D.C., where we have hearings and say, if you come and testify, I was at the IRS when they told me to help destroy the Tea Party movement by not letting them incorporate and get tax ID numbers and so on, and here's how I did it. But I want you to promise I'm not going to prison. I want to tell you everything. And what we need to do is not decide. I mean, remember Hillary Clinton clearly broke the law when she set up her secret email system and talked to people all around the world while her family was raising money from heads of state that she was emailing secretly to. Lord knows what, criminality there was there. But I'd have been much happier if instead of saying, we're going to put you in prison, we'd have said, we need to see those emails. We need to know who destroyed them. We need to know everything we can about them. How do we get all that information? And nobody's going to jail. But if we know how the system was corrupted, we can come up with mechanisms to make sure it never happens again.
So it's kind of a super duper whistleblower protection kind of a thing.
Yes, but for some of the whistleblowers will be the people who did the crimes. Okay.
Yeah.
I did this. I'm willing to tell you all about it, but I really want to know I'm not going to prison. And I'm much more interested in fixing the problem than in putting X number of people in jail for a few years because they broke the law. I want to make sure how the transparency is so robust and the enforcement is so robust that nobody would think to politicize the executive branch the way Biden did and Obama did and Clinton did. I mean, this is a long-term problem, guys.
Yeah. Okay, couple more things, and then I want to go to questions because we have some really good questions, okay?
Okay.
I want to ask you, I have I'm getting old, sadly. You are too. And I have a concern that we've spent the last couple decades in this weird pendulum swinging thing where one president does executive orders and then another president does executive orders that undo them. And then the next president does executive orders. And it seems to me that the way you actually make structural change is through legislation. I mean, look at what a hard time we've had, getting rid of Obamacare. I mean, when you get something in legislation, that's really structural and that's really strategic. And I would like to see us take advantage of the opportunities we have to lock in things through legislation rather than executive orders. What are your thoughts on whether it's immigration or something else? Yes, short term you address it through executive orders, but long time, don't you really need legislation to structurally make changes that will outlast a particular administration?
Yes. And this chart here, from 1932 over to the yellow line, which is 1994, you'll see the top is who ran the Senate. Blue is Democrat, red is Republican. Bottom is who ran the House. Red is Republican, blue is Democrat. From 1932 to 1994, 62 years, the Republicans had control of the House and the Senate for 4 years, 2 years under Truman and 2 years under Eisenhower. We did briefly during Reagan's presidency have a pre-Reagan Republican majority, meaning most Republicans weren't Reagan Republicans. They were still Eisenhower Republicans and Nixon Republicans who can and would raise your taxes and spend more money. But it's now we have basically a Reagan Republican party on not being willing to raise taxes or spend too much money for new for new projects. So 62 years, 4 years, Republicans were in charge of the House and the Senate. Yeah, we had the presidency, but presidents don't run the country. Congress decides the tax level. Congress decides the spending level. Congress decides the laws. Presidents can veto things and delay what the Democrats wanted, but that's all they could do is delay them. When did the Democrats make progress? Because you're talking about how do you make things permanent? 1934 to 36, 2 years, the New Deal. The Democrats had 80% of the Senate and 80% of the House, super majorities. They had the entire South plus half the rest of the country, okay? Then, and so they passed Social Security and issued and things like that. Then Great Society was exactly 30 years later, 64 to 66. We had 70% Senate, 70% of the House, wild super majorities. That's when and half of the federal government was created in 4 years, 2 years New Deal, 2 years Great Society. And you'll notice that after they passed each of those, their support in the country collapsed.
Yeah.
But not enough to get it undone. Okay.
Right.
And so they planted these oak trees that grew, these entitlements that grew. Sometimes people say, how come the Republicans are allowing all this spending to increase? Because it takes 60 votes in the Senate to change the entitlements. And unless you change the entitlements, spending keeps going up. Okay. So it's not like the Republicans having 53 in the Senate and a 1-vote margin in the House. They can change very little, guys. It's not, to get past a filibuster is tough deal. Okay. Yeah. And we don't have those kind of numbers to change laws. Change some budget numbers, yes. Change laws, not the same thing. So what we now have is in 94, that's the yellow line here. That happens to be the year when 96% of Republicans signed the pledge that we share with everybody. I will never raise your taxes. I will never raise your taxes. I will never raise your taxes. George Herbert Walker Bush signed that pledge in 88. He defeated Bob Dole because he took the pledge and handed it to Dole in the middle of a debate and said, we've all signed the pledge. Everybody signed the pledge except Dole. Dole didn't. Dole reacted like he was a vampire and somebody tossed a cross in his lap. On TV. It was not a good look. Dole lost the New Hampshire primary. Bush won the New Hampshire primary. Then he was running, before I moved to the United States, before I immigrated to the United States, I used to live in Massachusetts. Right. And up in Massachusetts, our governor Dukakis was 14 points ahead of Bush when the Republicans started their convention. 14 points ahead of Bush. That was the guy from Arkansas, which wasn't even technically a state yet. We still beating Bush. Then Bush got up and said, read my lips, no new taxes, I'm never raising taxes, and he won. But then 2 years in, he raised taxes, and even though he won the Cold War and defeated Iraq and didn't get stuck occupying the place for 50 years, he governed very, very well with one problem. He raised taxes, he lost. Then that's when all the Republicans said, I get it. Take the pledge, win the primary, take the pledge, win the general, keep the pledge, get reelected. So from 1994, the Republicans have not voted or passed a tax increase ever, okay? Only taxes go up if the Democrats have the House, Senate, and the presidency. That's it. And the 2 times they've done that, they've lost control of Congress immediately the next year, right? It's not popular to raise taxes. Yeah. So 60%, the Republicans have won 60% Congress 60% of the time since 94, 60%, not 1 out of 15 years, 60% of the time. That's why we now undo their executive orders, whereas here, not so much, okay? No, we need to get our numbers up. I don't know if we can get 80 and 70%, but you need super majorities to pass serious legislative change. and have that level of control. Because you have to have some weak sisters who don't vote with you, but you need them for leadership, but they can't vote with you because they live in Maine or in some other state where it's iffy. What's irritating is people who live in 70% Republican districts who don't decide to vote with the team because
Right.
it's fun. And they're never going to lose an election, so they don't care if anybody's mad.
If you're in a secure R district, you really need to be a bold leader, not a milk toast kind of a member. I want to touch one more thing, and then we'll go to questions, because as I said before, I know you pay a lot of attention to the state level as well as the federal level.
I have a chart for that.
Yeah. Go ahead. One of the underappreciated things, I think, really since the first Obama midterm election is the Republican dominance at the state level. I mean, it has ebbed and flowed, but there's really exciting things going on at the state level. Could we talk 3 or 4 minutes about some of the states who are phasing out their state income tax and things like that? Because there's very exciting things going on.
Yes. Green states. Texas is one of them. No personal income tax. There are 8 states that have no personal income tax at the state level. New Hampshire became the 8th. They used to claim to be a no income tax state, but they were lying because they didn't tax wages, but they did tax investment and dividend, interest and dividend.
Yeah, they had like a dividend. They had an interest and dividend tax, right? Yeah.
Yes. So did Tennessee. Tennessee got rid of theirs over a 6-year period, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, gone. And then they started a 5-year phase out for New Hampshire. And the governor there, Sununu, said, 5 is nice. I want it gone before I leave. So they got rid of it in 3. Boom, boom, boom. Gone. 8 states, green, no income tax. Those yellow states you're looking at here are 15 states where you have a single rate tax, a flat rate tax. Why do I distinguish between flat rate taxes and everybody else? Even though some of these states may have low taxes, North Dakota has low, but they've got 2 rates, it used to have 9. The 2 rates down, they don't have 1 rate, they have 2. If you have 1 rate, it is very difficult to raise taxes because the politicians have to look at everybody and say, I'm going to steal all your money from everybody in this room and spend it on my project, which is really great. You'll love it. We're all listening. Okay. And in Illinois, right? Illinois, Chicago, corrupt, Democrat, Bolshevik, big spending. Okay. Their tax is less than 5%, their income tax. Why? By constitution, it's a flat rate tax. And the politicians in Illinois are scared to go to 6 or 5.5. They're under 5 because they think people would not put up with it. They want to go to a graduated tax.
They can't divide and conquer, essentially. Yeah.
Yes. That's the big difference. You cannot divide and conquer. And that's why states first go to a single rate tax and then go to 0. 7 states have moved to a single rate tax in the last 5 years. So we got more. Add on, North Dakota is going to get there. Ohio will get there this year. Kansas will go to single rate this year. That's 3 more, right? This year. And there may be some others that we missed. But, I think we don't. I don't have South Carolina on this. They're going to a single rate. They just announced they're going to 3.5% single rate tax this year. Okay. So this is very, very good. They're going to leapfrog below North Carolina, below Georgia. They're scared. These other states are getting ahead of them, and now they're dropping theirs to 3.5. So there is a competition. And I don't know if you can see it, but the ones with black dots are ones where the governor and the legislature says, we are going to 0. Arkansas, the governor was elected on a promise to go to 0. They've cut taxes every time they've come into session, significant tax cuts. They're on the way to 0. The governor of Oklahoma is committed to 0, as is the head of the House. They're now working on the Senate guy. Louisiana just voted to go to a 3% flat rate tax, and on to 0. The governor and the legislature is committed to that. Mississippi, the governor and the House are all they've gone to 4% flat rate tax, but now they want to go to 0. The Senate guy is dragging his feet, but when the Senate guy dragged his feet in Oklahoma, they defeated him. So I think we may see Mississippi also move to 0. Now our friends in Ohio are going to flat rate, and then they want to go to 0. Kentucky and West Virginia have both voted to go to zero, and they're clicking it down automatically. North Carolina is a automatic down. The way this works is they say we're not taking the income tax, and moving it over to the sales tax and just shifting who pays. They're actually saying we're going to put a cap on spending, but revenue comes in above the cap because of growth and so on. So when revenue pops up above that spending limit, the teachers union can steal some of it, but we're going to have a permanent reduction in the income tax of 1/10 of a point or 1/4 of a point or 1/2 a point, depending on how aggressive they are. And so for 12 years, North Carolina has every year clicked down their rate. And they're on the way to 2.5, and then they're going to pass another law to take them all the way to zero.
Yeah.
They've been very cautious. They were the first guys to do it. Everybody watches them to make sure it's safe. And Iowa, in 3 to 4 years, moved from 12% corporate to 7%, and 8.6 individual to 3.8 this year. Okay, more than half in 3 to 4 years. And now they're going on to zero. So Texas, you got a bunch of states following you that intend to be at zero in the next 10 to 15 years. I think you're going to see another 15 states at zero.
This tax competition between states is a beautiful thing to behold. I grew up in South Carolina, so I pay a little bit of extra attention to South Carolina, and they've always been an outlier. But as you say, they've been getting out competed, and it's like they're looking all around them and they're saying, holy cow, we better do something so we can remain competitive. And that's the beauty of tax competition. And, even here in Texas, we're going to have to set our house in order here pretty soon too, or we're going to start getting out competed by some of these other states, because our business tax regime is not as efficient and as sort of like, broad-based and low rate as it possibly could be. So that's one of the things we want to try to be of help with.
I'm sorry, I just got a refill on my coffee, so now I'm raring to go for the rest of
Okay,
this.
okay. Well, let's go to the questions then. We have a couple of early questions here about our pre-show discussion about music. I'll skip over them, but I just want to acknowledge our friends Allison and David for commenting on our music conversation. Our friend Joe Barnett asked, will there be one reconciliation bill or two? I think you've already kind of dealt with that. I mean, there was some discussion about two, but I think it's going to end up being one, correct?
Yes, I did. Almost certainly it'll be one. That's where the president is. That's where the House leadership is. That's where the Senate Finance Committee is. There may be some conversation back and forth, but two will kill the bill. And the reason for that is there are a handful of Republican House members who, once they voted for building the wall, don't think they have to do anything else for the rest of the year. And they will sit and whine about the not perfect budget, because it won't be perfect. The taxes won't be low enough and the spending won't be low enough. It'll be better than before, but it won't be perfect. And they'll sit back and go, I'm not voting for something that isn't perfect. And they don't think their constituents will be mad. They will be mad later. Because they voted for the wall. But you put them together and people no longer can play games with the important tax cuts.
Mike Hirsch asks a really interesting question. Over the course of the campaign, Trump made a number of tax promises. He promised to not tax tip income. He promised to not tax overtime. He promised to not tax Social Security benefits. I can, in my mind, rationalize not taxing tips because I could see that as a gift rather than income. But has ATR taken any official position on any of that, or do you have any thoughts on any of that?
There's a distinction there. The president has said certain things many times, and as part of the platform, let's go to 15% and on the corporate income tax and so on. The no taxes on tips, which I think is a brilliant political move and fine economics. Tips are a marginal, not taxing tips is a cut and marginal tax rate cut, okay? Because it's the last, you've already gotten your pay, but then this is in addition. So it's the last bit of it's on the margin, which is more important to encourage than the first hour you work.
Right.
And you cutting taxes on the first hour you work doesn't make you work more hours because you already worked the first hour. But not taxing tips makes you work more and better, okay, more competently and more hours. It also stops the labor unions from being able to organize beauty salons, hair, men's barbershops, restaurants, and so on, because the first thing a union has to do is kill tips. That's why in cities you see the efforts to end tipping and have a minimum wage instead, because then if everybody at the restaurant is paid the same amount per dollar, then the union can come in and say, I'm going to get everybody a quarter in rate, okay? But first they have to take away your ability to distinguish yourself through competence and hard work and doing a good job. You can't go in and say, now some of you work really well and hard and you get more tips than other people. We're going to steal your tips and divide it among everybody. That's what we're going to do here, because we're going to unionize it. Nobody can make more than anybody else. Everybody has to have the same dollar per hour. You can't unionize something where people's income is differentiated by how hard they work, how well they work. So very important to the unions to kill tipping. We want to not kill it. We want to allow it to flourish. The other piece there is I'm in favor of abolishing those taxes that create tremendous problems for people's privacy. They have to be looking over your shoulder to tax your tips, okay? They have to know what dollars are left on the table, what change is left on the table. In order to actually enforce taxing of tips, you can't have any financial privacy in your life. So I'm in favor. I think that's a good idea. I'm against the death tax for many reasons, but one of it is simply privacy. You know,
Right,
how much gold is in your teeth when you die. That there's no point in that. It's also taxing the same income for the fourth time. But
I mean,
one more reason is privacy.
That's always been one of the arguments for consumption taxes, right? Is that they're better for financial privacy than, income taxes and things like that. Okay, so I just want to know, do you think there's anything to my construct that tips are gifts, not income? I mean, could that possibly be a rationale for doing this?
Except they have a gift tax.
Well, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
Yes, it's sort of true, but it is a gift in return for service. So it's hard not to see it as well earned income.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So our friend Wayne Stoltenberg says, Grover, you've identified 7 or 8 House Republicans who are essentially not on board or not always dependable. Wayne wants to know, what can we do to put pressure on them or to get them to dust off their resumes?
I think, look, most of those guys are well-meaning and they think they're being conservative, but they flitter around and they see something and they let me throw a rock at them. I had 2 grown-up Texas congressmen tell me that it's okay to threaten businesses because so many of them are woke. Well, what is it that we know? Okay. We know that the corporate income tax is not paid by some guy named Mr. General Motors.
Right.
There is no Mr. General Motors.
Right.
When you raise the corporate income tax, it is paid, and even the liberal economists agree that 20 to 40% of the corporate income tax is directly out of the pockets of workers in lower pay or fewer hires. Other people suggest
this is so important. I mean, General Motors doesn't get to cast a single vote, right? It's the workers, it's the shareholders, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So who pays? I mean, there are different ways of looking at it, but basically, most of the cost, maybe I think 70%, that's what the tax foundation finds. Some people think it's higher. It comes straight out of workers' pockets. Lower wages, lower pay increases, fewer people working. And then if you're in a non-competitive market where you can raise your prices a bit to pay the government for the extra money they're demanding, well, then it comes from consumers. But if you're in a completely competitive market, you can't raise your prices, okay? And not end up in trouble. And then some of it comes from the devaluing the company. If you raise the corporate income tax, Microsoft is worth less money because its income is taxed more highly. Well, how many tens of millions of Americans have Microsoft in their portfolios?
They probably don't even know it because they're in 401ks and IRAs and mutual funds and things, right?
And the value of those companies going down impoverishes, reduces the life savings of every American with a 401k, an IRA, an HSA, an investment in general. half the country or more are in the stock market, in their defined contribution pensions or in their individual savings. So this is a tax on the bulk of the American people. The only reason for the corporate income tax is to hide the fact that politicians are stealing money from workers and consumers and retirees. And they want to pretend that they're stealing somebody else's money. This is why people say, I'm a populist. I think the corporation should pay the money, not you, while they have their hand in your pocket stealing your money
Right,
by raising your prices, lowering your wages, and reducing your life savings. So if we can, and again, the Americans for Tax Reform working on the 2017 tax bill, we did a lot of polling to find out how best to argue for taking the corporate rate down. And we found that a lot of people, both in focus groups and in polling, the average citizen gets that it raises prices and reduces wages and hurts their life savings. This is not a surprise to people. But some of our politicians act as if they're being popular. They think they're being populist by saying evil big companies, we're going to steal their money. But the problem is the smarter ones know darn well that they're looting the average citizen, but they play this game. And that's where you've got the Freedom Caucus endorsing tax increases on businesses as if they weren't stealing your money. That is so disgustingly dishonest.
You had a brilliant strategic effort a few years ago, and the idea was to emphasize this sort of ownership thing, right? We want as many American workers as possible to have 401ks, right? We want to move from pensions to 401ks and IRAs because we want them to be invested in the American economy. We want them to have a direct relationship. And so part of what you're describing is how that has borne fruit, right? Where, raising taxes on corporations, regulating corporations, that affects the return on my retirement fund. That affects the return on my 401k, my IRA, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you're a shareholder, even if you don't think of yourself that way, Yeah.
Well, we need more Americans to have the opportunity to be shareholders. We need more pensions that are defined contribution pensions that people control, not defined benefit pensions, which somebody else controls. And we need to make sure that people see that and that it's transparent to them. And the great news is there's some wonderful polling by Scott Rasmussen. And he found that if you had $5,000 worth of stock, not $1 million, 5,000, made you 20% more Republican and less Democrat. And that was true for high income, low income, white, black, government worker, private sector, where everybody became more Republican with share ownership because they watched the news when the stock markets announced. Okay.
Right. They suddenly have a vested interest, which they didn't have before.
They may have had it before, but now they know it. Now they know it. And the increase in the modern Republican Party's registration up into 94, into the 90s, you could track exactly with the growth of the shareholder majority now in the country. As more people own shares of stock directly, they were more Republican. It was only about 10% in 1960, and now it's over 50%.
Okay, couple more important questions. Our friend Peter Lowe. Oh boy, Peter, you've asked the painful question. What are the chances for entitlement reform? Grover, you know this. I think a lot of our listeners are sophisticated enough that they know this. There's only so much you can do with discretionary spending. I mean, you should do what you can, but the real problem is entitlements that are on autopilot. And it just seems like it's the thing to do these days for a president to say, I'm not touching entitlements. What do you see as the process? I should say that our IPI's Dr. Merrill Matthews co-wrote a book a couple of years ago about the entitlements cliff, proposing specific solutions, which by and large involve block grants to the states, personal retirement accounts, and things like that. But what are what's your attitude toward the near-term potential for entitlement reform?
I'm going to be more cheerful than I think you anticipated.
Okay.
Because block granting Medicaid, which we came within one vote of doing. Remember, John McCain did no.
Right.
We passed it in the House. We had the votes in the Senate for it because the president was for, because McCain was for it. All the other Republicans were for it. We gave a pass to the senator from Maine, who got herself reelected and gave us several judgeships. So that was important. And then there was the senator from Alaska who had no good reason for not voting with us. And and who doesn't vote for our Supreme Court justices, but is still there. They were no votes, but we understood that. We knew we were still going to win because we had McCain's vote. And at the last minute, he decided to vote no. What that was block granting Medicaid to the states. And that, because the way they do it, it's a budget number, it actually was okay to do within reconciliation. So we could block grant Medicaid, food stamps, housing, any number of things. The one that I think is most likely is Medicaid, because we voted on it 3 times under Clinton and passed it, the Republicans. Now, Clinton said, I will allow you to block grant food stamps, but not Medicaid. And so that's what we did. We got the one block granted. If we need to tighten up some of the regs in food stamps, and that would be that you could do by executive order or by the executive offices making certain decisions. So you can do some savings there. But the biggest is block granting stuff to the states and then say, instead of growing wildly high as it does on automatic pilot, you limit it to inflation or inflation plus population and block grant it out to the states. Then every state could look, and some people say it's 15 to 20% fraud. So a state could go out and decide to take that seriously and save some of that money. States could say, you know what, you have to be a citizen. You know what, you have to be trying to work anyway. There's a limit to how many years you can be doing this. And so the state can save a great deal of money. When we did aid to families with dependent children and block granted them under Clinton, okay, it was Reagan's idea with the block granting. Reagan block granted something like 70 different small programs when he came into office. It doesn't get much attention. I didn't even realize it looking back. And I was looking at block grant and I said, well, Reagan did 70. It's very small ones. But we ought to do all the small ones. Now, how much of that can you digest between now and April? I think it's not unreasonable to say we can do better on food stamps and on aid to families with dependent children, because we've had Republican votes on that. They've been discussed. This isn't a surprise to anybody. You might even be able to do housing, because some states don't like to build housing and some states do. And I think if we're going to, we shouldn't hold the rest of the pro-growth, pro-housing, have more houses people, states held back by the states that think it's tacky to have houses for people, but not tacky to have homeless people. So much can be done. Now, what the president has never said, I won't touch entitlements. What he said is Social Security and Medicare are not on my list. The way the president phrased it in the first election, although I'm not sure exactly how he said it the second, other than that those were the two he didn't want to mess with, was he promised not to do it for anybody who is at or near retirement. It's not the same thing as saying if you're 20 years old, we're going to start a process on Medicare, which everybody expects to happen someday, that you move it from 65 to 67, but every year it advances by a month so that it's not a shock to anyone, and people near retirement who've counted in their heads on what's going to happen don't have a shock. But if you're 20 years old, first of all, it's not going to be there for you if we don't do something to reform Medicare. And there's some other, interesting savings. If with some of the drugs we have on helping people lose weight, if that, people can not lose the weight and not get some of the diseases that flow from that, you're talking, getting kidney. If people can replace kidneys more easily from other people.
If you can statistically reduce the amount of diabetes in the country, there's billions of dollars of savings there.
And get people enough kidney transplants. If you let people sell their kidneys, it's some number like 40 billion a year that we do
Yeah.
for this stuff with kidneys. It's a large number. There's a
Yeah.
lot of savings to be had there from progress in medicine.
Yep. Okay. One more question. Our friend Bob Hyde has got a couple questions related to debt and deficits.
Okay, but then I hope we can get back to Janis Joplin.
Yeah. Well, you know what? We had a couple questions. One of our friends, Allison, said you need to pay attention to Ella Fitzgerald, which is a very defensible point to make. So,
Well,
so,
I'm not
so,
saying Janis Joplin is the only high point of Western civilization.
yeah, 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 yeah. Okay. Well, I have to address my Janis Joplin deficiency clearly, but I have a lot of deficiencies I have to address. Okay, so Bob wants to know a couple things. He wants to know about this idea of taxing some of these enormous private university endowments and things like that. Is that something and I want to distinguish between things that ATR is taking a position on and your general overall sort of thinking about something. So what do you think about those proposals?
Yeah, very good question. One of the things that the Republicans included in the 2017 bill was to tax university endowments that were above a certain percent. There's the wonderful observation by UNZ, that Harvard is a it's a collection of money with a university. It's like a investment bank with a university attached to it. Okay,
it's a hedge fund.
That's it.
With the university attached to it, right?
That's the one. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Which is true. I mean, the massive savings and accumulated wealth that's there. I don't have any. First of all, if you're going to make taxes fairer by raising some, you have to cut others. So if it was a standalone bill, I'd be against making a change that just raised taxes, even if it was justifiable in any sense, because any tax hike or the elimination of a deduction or credit could be used to pay down other taxes, taking the general income tax down. So I don't want to end any unfair break just to give the government more money. I am going to and be supportive of something in the context of a general reduction, something. There's a real question of a lot of the nonprofits in the country are engaged in for-profit work. I'm not sure there's any reason that a university should be considered that its nonprofit status is necessarily useful or important. There are for-profit schools too. So there's a real question of some of this stuff. And I guess one is tempted to say if Harvard was paying taxes on its endowment, they might be less excited about raising everybody else's income taxes or capital gains taxes.
Right.
But I think something like that could be in there as long as it's offset by real tax cuts, and it taxes an activity that's otherwise taxed for other people. I'm not big on the difference between for-profit and not-for-profit. I don't see National Geographic is technically nonprofit. Time Magazine would be for-profit. Why are they taxed differently? It's a good question.
No. Okay. So, and your answer obviously provides an opportunity for us to sort of emphasize one point, and then I'll let you go. And that is that the pledge is about overall net tax increases, right? Because I know that you run into this all the time, right? Someone's proposing to eliminate a tax and then to raise another tax. And the real issue is it an overall, I mean, if I have this wrong, correct me, but the real issue is this an overall tax increase? Is this a net tax increase? There's nothing wrong with sort of rejiggering the tax base as long as you're not raising the overall taxation, right?
Yes, let me just add one thing
Yeah.
No increasing the rates, but you can eliminate deductions and credits as long as the rates come down by the same amount. So we would not defend any particular deduction or credit. I mean, there's, expensing makes sense. A lot of things are worthwhile, but there are some that you just look at and go, that was put in by special interests. There's not a really good argument for it. I still would argue, don't get rid of it to spend the money, but do get rid of it to take the rates down for everybody else. And that's the big distinction. The good news is the vast majority of Republicans in the House and the Senate have signed a pledge to you that they will not increase taxes and will not increase corporate or individual rates. And by doing that, as I showed you the chart earlier, the Republican Party has become the majority party in Congress 60% of the time since they made that commitment, whereas before it was 4 years out of 62 without making that commitment. A Republican Party whose views its job as raising taxes every time the Democrats spend too much money, there's a reason they lost elections again and again and again. Goldwater opposed the Kennedy tax cuts because he wanted to raise money to pay for all the stupid spending. Why is that conservative, for crying out loud? I mean, and the Kennedy tax cuts, like the Reagan tax cuts, the Trump tax cuts, the Coolidge tax cuts, spurred growth to where revenue was higher after the tax cut than was projected if there'd been no tax cut.
Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Grover, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being with us. How can people follow your work on social media, and how can people follow ATR?
Sure. The website is atr.org, atr.org. We put out material every day on what's happening. And if you ask, we'll send you a weekly memo on what's going on in the world of taxes. And I tweet at Grover Norquist, and cover state and local taxes, and now also international taxes. Our friend Malay in Arizona, but Argentina, close, in Argentina, took the pledge because the taxpayer group that is our sister taxpayer group in Argentina, shares the pledge with people, also in Brazil, Japan, and now in Britain. The pledge is going international. He took the pledge on national TV and added something to it. Not only will I not raise taxes, if I do, he said verbally, it's not on the written one, he said, I'll cut off my arm. And which I thought maybe we should add some
you don't require self-mutilation for the.
No, we're very moderate, very reasonable. So that watching some of the other international tax groups learn from the United States and how we can learn from Argentina and how other states learn from Texas, and Texas can take a look over your shoulder at the states gaining on you. Yeah. Those are the ones you can learn from. Particularly, you need to limit the ability of local governments to raise taxes and borrow. Whether it's saying you can only have bonding votes on election day when everybody knows about them, right. Or that I recommend to you Florida's law on property taxes. The property tax on your house can only go up 3% a year, full stop. What about the rate? What about the assessment? What are you paying? Now, it can only go up 3% a year. And by the way, when you sell your house, that protection goes to the person you sold it to. So you're not attaching a boat anchor of higher assessments or higher taxes when you sell your house. Big cities are blue because they hire Democratic precinct workers with your tax dollars and then try and beat you at the state level. And Texas's danger is your cities gang up and try and take over the state.
Yeah, we're trying in this session to actually do something about that. I mean, because this is how blue cities go spiral downhill, is that the state legislature feels like, well, local control, we can't do anything about that. We should maybe do another Zoom on that topic at some point. But Grover, I really appreciate it. I want to thank everybody who's participated today, everybody who's joined us. Thank you so much. I hope this has been a benefit to you. I hope you've learned something. And as I said earlier, this will be archived on our YouTube channel and on our website, so you'll be able to share it with other people, as you should. Thank you again, Grover. Thank you to all of you. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks a lot.